to interact and engage with each other. We will now move on to the next session of sharing a witness account. It is an honor to welcome Tibetan filmmaker and activist Venerable Golok Jigme to share his experiences with us. Kandin Somala, UN Advocacy Officer, Office of Tibet, Geneva, will do the simultaneous translation.
동물대 배우네 소절과 고르나마 정말라 사람들 다시 되노지에는 내망랑 것도 좀 이제 마이나 단도니 또 솔레 맞다 근데 이제 로민 조금 맞지 근데 이제 나츠다 존지감 진영에 존재지긴
Good afternoon. Thank you everyone for being here today. My name is Golok Jigme. I am a human rights advocate, activist, and a documentary filmmaker.
Longin zote mazizere. Longin de karche zo gore zete twazi gore. Longin de ta jana jonga. Zamla yong da jerko so so. Tisala 고욕 당네 다 보그 region 빠른저런 코리도 상마 항상 야지 당조스 사열 따위 나 반전 똑되니 시슈즈 요 만nak 람카데 어떤다미 람카데 쩌죠 텐디게 접접자만 몽보지체 다 니통자 자고 올랑리튼 단속 제가 쳇다 텐디 접접자만 몽보지 베스 옛날에 같은 지토 롱년데 가르치는 때기 무유의 내탕 복 내탕의 가르치네 뜻들이 늘리지 레타 말에 야나가 접접 zaman 뜻들이 레타 무유 내탕 뜻이 단 지터지 무쇼로냐 될래
I am a documentary filmmaker, not by chance but by choice. You all might be wondering why I was involved in making a documentary film. The reason why I was involved in making the documentary film is to expose China's lies about Tibet and to uncover the truth. China propagates lies that Tibetan culture, language, and identity are flourishing. But the sad reality is completely different. China's Tibet policies seek to assimilate Tibetan people, annihilate Tibetan culture, and destroy Tibetan environment.
The Longin Zuni, Jupiter Longi, Mujan Longin Zuni, Ma Tilatini, Zonkana Thomasona Soy. Tambo de Niton Jagada, Sambi, Darinis Samgunima de la Janaka, Nientowadan, Magmi Punchimbo Yone, Azamri, Zamtang de la Musterka. Charles Zaman wrote this around the Chioma, some humble Senanga Ticho Kayade. Tenijin Zamni Nimatani, Davachi, the Niman Stasina, Tam Mushel in the Nastu Tamari, thinking what is cherry.
My friend Kundu Wang Chen and I met the documentary film. Because of my role and involvement in documentary film, I was arrested thrice. And I was arrested for the first time with lots of Chinese officials and police arbitrarily arrested me, and it is not possible to share every detailed account on the way and how I was arrested. So I will be very brief.
This is a natural Rambate and attach, younger Chinese natural Ramba Momboji Tangore, Yana, that Muster Chigani, Shana, Matuti Sungore. That the Kamne Marala Nachu Tontan Dushudi Zamning Nabazoshagan Nachu Tontan Dushudi a dark check captures a Yami Kain Lohuten Zazio Lohuten Gatani Jaraina, that Lohuten check some must check captures. Check capture de la Teneti, Nangajana, that the Shiong Nangajana, Tonjik chair, Nachu Tontan. Not daily dog de capture 다지 가서 되는 레시 잡나 지금 작던도 어떤지 제나 다 내설 로가리 말도 다지 나초 땅땅데 급작될 때는 나초 땅땅 내리지 사실 제거에는 생고 마용하고 간이 샷 맡아봐도 되지 총고 되니 제나 다 강터 저거 급작될라가 당마 게다가리 남덕제리 당마 게바텔라 럭바니 응소 강바니 응소 저다 다 가성대나 나버스 때나 럭바가 된 서버다 강바 저 참만 제마가 시월이 다 가성대나라 요리 때나 요리 되니 제네 당마 게다가 남덕제서 만만 남덕 제가 디 제라 럭히 치고라 말아 다본 거리 만소텔라 걸로서 텐디식 침보서 장네 먹나 알로테서 잡들지나 다 가서 대라 먹시르 거니다 마자가 모양은 어디 먹때 때리 나빠 차가리 아니 가츠라 돼서 정말다 먹극극지나 남덕 제저거디 홍 저보 제책 같은데 레파라 치고 그 마테나 계속 가츠들아 구텐디죠 차 다 텐디가 내서 전에 텐디 타말 게 남덕 제리
While in detention, I was subjected to a series of torture. I was physically tortured. Words will not justify the kind of torture and pain inflicted on me. And I'll share you the most painful and terrifying moment of my life while in prison. This was when the Chinese authorities shackled me, and for the first time when I was put on the iron chair. So I was left tied until the next morning, and my body became motionless and the body temperature dropped completely. So for the whole night, a bright and heavy torch was placed on the table that was placed exactly in front of the iron chair. The heat and the light coming out from the torch was so strong and it was so powerful that it made me feel like as if my whole body was melting, and light from the torch was so strong that I was unable to open my eyes. Because of the strong and powerful lighting, even today I have an eyesight problem. So I still have scars on my hand and feet from the torture sustained while in prison.
근데 남도 탕마 거와 나오듯이 잡로가 럭반들이지네. 저거 다디 급작하잖아. 저거 알롱 데니지 그제요. tel라니 럭반이 잡로가 땅 강반이 잡로가 데니지네. 딱 콘지 땅스. 당니까 데라 먹거라 자와랑 남르금도 먹거 다가는 아주 지금 옷으로 자 꼴꼴꼴 제 데니지 먹금 다가요 거든. 된다 kokbata kemani che song sam dos morning course song ato da nang ke jimata lomchen de ta long sa sam tendi tanang ne shenen je sam tendi sam course ta kharsan tena ti chak kapchak di ta narcho ta ta da na te de nyana ji chachen do semya ja ga tendi ke nang cha cha do mone ji ge samnu nang khor ma ta ba tendi ke narcho tong ta te je na da ngarang ka samdu ta na ta ti cho jang ma bo ja jak song sam cho da ji ne Diana Kenya toga de Susia de Gat, Tendi Mambo, Jackson, and a conscious star on Jokomarze. Teacher needs a Hanaja de Chana, Tendi Jojin, Dosar and a Cabsman Docomar, Donara, Teacher Hanaja de Mashagar is that they didn't conjure the Wayango and the men and Mexican, Marango Mutene, Teacher Mambo, Jackson, Tendi Shari. That Tendi Jene counter Nacho Tonton, Nordi, she debut on the Nacho Tonton Carambaro, Nordi Gina. Tendi Mendro, da Mambo Giana, Nimashikamas and Yejina, Jeji or Yana, Tisuta, Taptane, Dodo Rojimarina Yakome Rosani, Taji, Libune Tangatana Nato Chakor.
When I was tortured on the iron chair for the 9th time, they put me differently. I was placed to face the back side of the chair, and my hands were shackled from the back side, and I was kept hanging from the ceiling upside down. I was put on the iron chair. I felt like I was put around 6 to 7 hours, but the Chinese authorities or the prison authorities told me that a person cannot be alive if they put on the iron chair like that for more than 2 hours, but I felt like I was kept for more than 6 to 7 hours. When I was put hanging upside down, I felt like all my organs were coming out from my mouth. So this kind of torture, to say the least, very terrifying, unacceptable, it's unthinkable. So I was tortured physically very, very severe. And So the kind of physical torture that I was subjected to while in prison, it is not possible to share every detailed account in this short time. I'll need at least 1 or 2 days to share every detail, the mode of physical torture that I was subjected to.
Tatendijire namaso she libu nertanga tangale narcho tortan tendijire dom rozi gyavjagana tande tarong jambaz shaji sari samsam yongore yongra yongore ta she libu zigbo tangla narcho tendiji tane na sem ka tangla ji yoyo bada ta ji ye kan yongda yore ta na sem ka tangla narcho karichi ne tongwe na samda samlo ma tangaz ge na te jwa de yongore na samlu tangla ta narcho tongda da mixer ka ngasu nang samlu tangla narcho tangla de da ngone changni shenna ta shesong na ya bonzu sa sam de da yong de ngone ta libu tang de da asik jamne dai jaga yenara ta nang samlu tang narcho tangda de da ngone changni janak ti tangla da ha swang kheo shang chib de de ni chaga ta nga sun de shen ji jamne shino ko da jambu jere ong wolan sammo je go ta chik je go gres a de ni da we wo mi dung zi a len fang chong fu ze da kong chi da ta ji jami 다 열개 정도 야나가 살 타지 로지잖아 데라 니버터 그 너수 남커지요 와다 너수 그 지금 득자인 거라 너수 정말 단 캐너스 샤고요스 근데 사업시 열거리 제모데 다 저거 뭐로 동적 촉촉해 거주 동적 촉촉해 다다 창으로 재미있는다 거라 동적 촉촉인데 동청 촉촉 나바 물린 지나 캐나라야 때 그런로 요스 대다 존나라서 가요 되게 지금 존이 뭐서 보나는 땅 요리스 존에 때서다 양 박배 항상 와봐 말비 요리스 어때서 정말 캐랑 그 샤니 들이제나 캐나라 가요 요스 따뜻한 상도 땅에 나서 땅다지 니가 때나 땅도 공천당 거 오레스 저 좀나지 있어라는 요 말에 캐랑다 논트트레스 저 아메리카가 겹토고 말에 단데 유럽다 네 결급 톱된 결급 로디 냠들 잘송도서 찍게 겹토고 말했어. temko는 거지 달라마를 겹토고 말했어. 디컵된 니통자글로다 아메리카 선선 조지 부시레 저 부시라 겹토고 말했어. 저 겹토고 삼거였나? 저 카브르자 게임에서 나저 색카브르자 게야 저 냠들 잘송 정제 카브르자 게나 주 무시에 카버지 무시에 카버지 줘라 주 무시에 카버지 줘라 야 뒤탈라마 카버지 겜베 가시아 겜베스 다 던지기 지금 통원총다 닙주다 지금 지원아 아땅거는 되네 다다들라 하라 혀송나 야고 아산선 삼모트니 콜도 오네 던지 제 캐런 거 산네 로 간지나 아지기잖아 캐런 거 로드 뱀보디 키즈송나 캐런 가 고야 로테 차가 버려지 키라자가 말했어 캐런 뱀보디 키라자가 말했어 던지지 그 땅에다 타서 어떻게 던지기 점이 다 낮췄다 그래. 낮췄다니 땅에 가치가 맞아가 되지. 가치가 맞아가 되지니 갑자기 다 추칸도 가차샤 제가 가차 인사 말했어. 다 추카도 매바당 동거스. 땅 아주 다다데 매차 다 여러분들 배 당한테는 뭐보다 다 시기로 왔대. 정도는 나 급적 나간 데리지네. 담자고래. 고도 문구야 지어만. 고텔라 포설 안나만 포설 생각인지 나 남쪽 좀 고고 좀 될때 카 매적 당하래. 다 카가 뻑바데 짭저게 망아적 성내나 가리나 다비 카가 뻑다 당데 묵처럼 오면 용도 하다가 오늘 야밍어서 네 지금 흑염니 다 묵처 문돈 거나 지금 답지도 못 보지나 딱 가리나 코다 지금 리와즈고 살에 카데서 어디 묵처다 이렇게 되게 되게 다지 되게 나바즈가 당데 카양 매적 당 되게 제
When the person is tortured physically, it is obvious that he or she is subjected to severe mental torture. So if I share you about the kind of the mental torture that I was subjected to while in prison, I was forced to denounce my spiritual leader, His Holiness the Dalai Lama. I was forced to denounce the Central Tibetan administration, and I was forced to condemn Tibetan Youth Congress. I was forced to admit and declare that the 2008 Tibetan mass protest in Tibet was a violent act. I was pressured to disclose the names of all Tibetans who participated in our secret interviews conducted for the documentary film, and forced me to give the name of all Tibetans who have participated in 2008 protests from Labrang, my monastery. And the Chinese authorities also told me that nobody would be there to care me. I was told that if the Chinese authorities killed me and dumped my dead bodies, neither the Dalai Lama nor President of the United States, that time it was George Bush, so no the President of the United States will protect me. So I was bullied and humiliated. That time I strongly felt that it would be better to die rather than suffer all the humiliation and rather than suffering unbearable and unthinkable torture in prison.
Technically, ngarang logic, chakchok logic la shouldn't be na. Lisbon nichala, kanka kardik tendi jedi yongare. Yendara nga terang yendara nabasu masona drowni kachashako the hopas the ngarang nyangstobs guzumni kachashakayo. Yorba yongni tachiloga yongni lo samdang jibate. Ngarang zamla ramjin dang jakob mobojila nedijini kachashadin rowe. The ngarang hopas the nyangstobs zone rowe. Chigina, may fopa the youngster of the courage in the young engine. Nay, Lika, she was in Johnson at the Sangame. Tea cap telanga, Janak, listen and each other not to tenji tangare. Tangni, Kerangar, touching Jupiter Lonian knowledge and Tada Pony Shaya Teso Samaganani. Nay, most chicken mountain, Jamie Jonla, Nietola Jami, Titimi. Tatamuni Kadi and Nay fopa, the Naraka Zubjit and Munichen in Rodayo.
So I was tortured physically and mentally. Since I escaped from Tibet and moved to Europe, it has been 3 years now. And I have been, like today, I speak in front of lots of people. So I have been advocating for all these. But I do it very proudly. So the courage that I have is because despite having lots of despite having lots of torture that I was subjected to, but I didn't give a single name of a person who was involved in the documentary filmmaker.
Tendijire da tene chiga nitong je yanchok da lisam jala nacho tong tang garam ba do di je tendiji ke chobaji da nitong go ta niwa den zong je ta niwa zong ji da da sam bin ngo zire tendijine ta ti kap de la na chiga jarko capture da ti chiga karla pore da chiga jarko ko sa shibjak na ni owning azamre Zamna natural kala kantum tangare. Tatanijina sarche mabut simar goache. Tanijine nitong gogo tajiga manaka chong kangro zigona tanijika jigdom jabsana yagometo.
So I was arrested for the second time in 2009, and I will not go into very detail and the kind of torture and all the experiences I was endured or I was subjected to in 2008. It was more or less similar. So when I was arrested for the second time in 2009, I was accused for leaking state secret.
Tan zong tang samba de ni tong ji ni ge da ge te ni she ni zga nga zam sang che de ta te ina tang samba de nga zam go no nga rang nga sa sa ne ta de khon chu da ta de che de nga zam ge wo tang la char che ya chi ja ten du nga rang ga zam ya ge ta de answer che jon re gomba re gerwa robot so re rang ga fire te nang mi te so le ka ina re rang ga get le ka ina re 상만 직동 되네. 마치 샘직도 정칸한 거 자고나 옷 머리도 옷 약급 담바 잡석이 제도 샘직도 정칸한 거 자다 자. 오늘 걔는 담자 상마야. 던지지고 로트가 받지지네. 내 그니다. 정칸한 거야. 그니다니까 때라 다지 파이르소 송어들이진 다 상마 직동도 잡되니. 다 다와 그 다른 세바니기 님한테 나가섬리. 점비 까블라 다와 님아치기다 아니 고르니다. 콘추 남제로당 까차 상마지 때문에 nga zongkang na ga mate ja ga charge yo da charge la jera khongsu samlo de zongkang na jo ga charge ma ta ngera ti ka de hekin phaksak ro ma lo na hekin phaksak ma je na je chi cha ta ti ka de la khongsu nga de ya ga charge de de la khongsu nga chi ga ro ya ga charge de ro sa chi mo yo ma she mi ye ma tong ro sa ma do ja mi lang ni da lam chi che de la 어떤지 그 땅에 셔킨 박사도 있잖아요. 나와 거기 다리 세 33배니 마텔라 참모티 숫자다 말하고 되는지 삼성 다 람조리 다 지금 망보직다 다 지금 번섬으로 촉네 말한 거 강박 다 강박고 그라 강석이죠. 때 시작하니 뭐 찍다 다리 엄마샤고니 로후된데 시작 급작되라 나 춘도도 전에 따가지고 참모티 옛날 대전에 단 제라도 속도라 던지로 직전에 단 참모티 저 진이라고 던지면로 던지지 그다 와르텔라 땅아 실로가 줘야가 다지 고스금로 라네 실로가 줘래 실로가 줘네 다다와 니그랑하다 모네라는잖아 다 야미 럭니다 샤마다다 다 모게 샤야나 다 카레나 르강 야란 로데 르강 딱딱 된 줘래 다 강바데 나파 차고레 디캅데라 데리치네 다 할체 르강니 샤레 삼정 삼로 데리진 코스 다와니 잠스가 다치 야미 잔심다데 손 피사레 데니 야미 탈라 탑착도 코노레 던디지 거 오네 갑리 다와니랑 항상 갑리 지겨
I was arrested for the third time on 22nd September 2012, and I was mentally prepared to spend the rest of my life in prison, because whatever I did was for the better cause. Whatever I did was, my conscience was very clear that it was for the better and bigger cause. So I was ready to spend the rest of my life in prison. But to my surprise, Chinese authorities planned to kill me. So I find all the possible way to escape from the Chinese prison. That was the only way or only thing that I can protect myself. So I decided to escape from Tibet, but thankfully it was around 10 p.m. on 30th September 2012, I was able to escape from Chinese prison. And I spent 2 months in hiding in mountainous area. I had a very tough time. But at that time, I felt that, I was able to save my life from Chinese authorities, from Chinese brutality. But when I was hiding in mountainous area, I thought that now this is the way I'm going to die. I am going to die in the mountain area. But thankfully, I was able to survive and able to challenge all the difficulties in getting foods, so protect myself from the mountainous area.
Today, dawa ni jidela. 다지 혁성거 렌디가 년섬즈네 다지 직서롱의 까차 직서롱의 다지 3월에 리베테 야미 삽작지 리캅데라 다와니 지 타다고데라 가르치는 골금지메 다 머스크 돈체 쇼도스 골금지메 그 머스아레 참보다 사른 판지 제가서 야미 까이까나네 사른 판지 제가서 사른 판지 항상 알아 던지지 그 땅에다가 골로운지메 르그네요나 통네요나 집자네요나도 예연 말이 야미 골모 천년씩 담아 짜예스 란주 간수 장체 공화 탱크 용 잡작진 카브르즈 집저 땅 천통 단에 상체 정다티 제리옥 그 종각 소소라 얘기게 던지지 땅니 삼도나 마숑아 던지지 사시제 the chapter the fair. That tea cup the Langi Samlu and Korea, the tea cup the Janala Dalanta go some of Mamboji, Conhomo in Korea, and Corna, the cup de la Shakaman. Tendijana, Tendijane Takanter, no, a Netam Zadakal, no Tesok and Yankapet, Nindi that Jixeron Lamkas Gandor. Tendiga Lamka the Gidney, Losi the Jakarata, Rogani, Kavjur, Roger, Tagayar. Chartangore, Gunkat Zagda, Kantangore, Tapo, Torgari, Tendijane, Takale, Losida Jakaranga, Kable, Mombos in Yongane, Niton, Tivji, Dawangawe, Dari, Churki and Samson. Or Tendijikanita, Tanga, Jikadaram Sala, Delang, Tatanshiri Yongare, Tiji de la Niton, Jongi, Dawatambunane. That's we say Sarah Yongar. capture jine da yo ni den ne tang sig.
After hiding in mountain for 2 months, I was shocked to learn that the Chinese authorities or the Chinese government has accused me of committing murder. So they even announced a reward of 200,000 Chinese yuan, that is around $30,000 US, for whoever discloses my location. So my life was under serious threat. So the best way to protect myself during that time, I thought of protesting Chinese government, and a series of plans came into my mind. But that time, the best way was to escape from Tibet. So after hiding and traveling, so facing lots of challenges, getting food, weather, and so many challenges for 1 year and 8 months, I was able to escape from Tibet. So it was on 18 May 2014, I arrived Dharamshala, and then in January 2015, I moved to Switzerland and sought political asylum.
Tendency that low some around the Europe, touching Ramsing, Jacob Soso, and Tunso, Mama, Sopta. Then I also to the Alaso, Jacob Soso. Then is la Maranga, that's a potential down, Poton Linger Cotella, Kala Corco and Natella Sony, Chiquito Thompson Rocini, that low some Teranganyamade Chaka. That Teranganyamande Kari Georgie so touching Kachaka, Dodo no Jigorita. Terang song the courage and Zamla Yamda Jarson, Rami Totanga, that Janak Kership, so the Chakor. Then in Nama Marangam showing Lord Jesus. Numbers of motor jetera. Man draw me to Tanare, Maran Muslim Bichani. Draw Muslim Bichani, Maran Capen Lenare, Top Tanare. But then the Kankas and Tada did the Kambang goats in it, Drovori, Javori. Yammer Johnson draw me Top Tang there, draw me Kankas here, draw me Top Tangla, Dozi Jago, Tesola, a Donentia, Sodis, Zambulanka, Sodi Chagor. Then a tongue miner, Janak Charge of Tama Kashi or Yenara Chigasu Karzakore, Tachigo, Yak Tachu, Matsuchigo, Samuna, Dolo Kaya, Tendi Chongamar, Kalakan Chiori. You are in a ta, Charism don't rot and Rosen Begare, Charism di Nala, Muni Tani Janakala, Charism Yang Tohazu. Yamber Jansok Koranga, Tachigo, Kanchang Mambojic own and then you talk about it. The Sola, see me the Martangachine, the Nipper and Zabulangatani, Munitani, Shana, Zipchitan Dambatan, Sona, one of Zipchitan Dambagoni, the Yamber Jansok, Songo. Then a time, the Church of Yakos, Maji, Janak, the Dingana, Chalan Rotana, Matso Popa, Ugurdani, Soboda, some the Sarkore. Sarkona, Matso Sarsona, Matso the Jones, the Muxaman, the Savamare, Zamlang, Kolandi, and Regions, Kachak Rover. Zamlang didn't draw me Chashis Tolan over. The Joyaga Niva, this Joyaga Totan, this Joyaga country theatre, Yamda Johnson draw me Totan Day or the Mato. The Natsu Boker Jia Goazere, the Natsu Boker Jia, the Natsu Inkensre, the Tart Luctor Chiata, then Yamda Johnson draw me Totanga, Hansoko, Ganson Sui, Samagan, the Tonang Yakbo chair of cheese, named Boker Jian. Tinanita Jacob Soso Katab down. Then it touches Johnson Tendiona, young Jacob Soso money on Romy Totanda, Musaka, Kele down, touching Tendila, Geomarket Rose, Roa meet Cassan Terra Netan, Roa meet Totanda, Panjo Nichala, Tongo Javana, Roa meet Totan the younger road, Panjo the Jern road, Roa meet Totan the Panjo Canyo, and the Netan Chaco Bichani, that a young gear Soba. Never just sweet, that's what Samaga. Tukizam on the Bokers down truck, touching us Janak Ogna, Kardik Nyonjimbe, Popa Yonso and Sapchini, number Samaga Tichi.
Since I arrived in Switzerland for the last 3 years, I have been traveling to different countries. I have been meeting different people, different representatives. And today is the day that I've been waiting for. And China has been reviewed by the UN member state several times. But the outcome from the review was not that satisfactory. And China is reviewing, the human rights record of China is once again reviewing by the UN member state. And UN is the international or the intergovernmental body, and it has the responsibility to protect the human rights. So what I wanted to say here is, if there is any representative from missions, this is my appeal. And during the review, please, this is my appeal, an urgent appeal to say that please review the human rights situation in China carefully, critically, and this is done. If UN fails to make China accountable this time, it is failure to all humanity. UN is the only body that we can appeal. UN is the only body that we can make noise, and UN has the responsibility to make China accountable. So I urge this to all the missions, and my final appeal is, please do not trade human rights.
Thank you, Geneva and Mandela. With this, we have now come to the third and the final session. I would like to invite Mandy McKeown, Campaigns Director, International Tibet Network, and Coordinator, Tibet Advocacy Coalition, to moderate the session titled Challenges to the Human Rights Institutions in Engaging with China.
Invite the panel to come up. We're going to introduce ourselves all together.
Next to Lauren, so I can flip easier. Sure.
Basically what I'm going to talk about. Oh, so I do better. Okay, that's interesting. Well, just tell me which. No. I'm talking.
No, I'm not.
All right, I can do it. I have to do good. I can do it British.
Yeah, you can skip.
That's the plan. I'll stick with the plan. No, it's copies of our report.
Thank you. I sit in. It's good. Thank you. Hello, John.
Hello.
Hello.
Nice to see you.
Good to see you.
Sorry, I've been unable to join most of the Tibet party meetings. It's been a crazy time for me.
Extraordinary. They were really good. Yeah. So I was really wasn't happy because it was nice. You know, I mean, they did a really good job. They did a really good job.
Yes.
So they've really done a very thorough, detailed mapping out of like every single issue that that we've been talking about endlessly. So just be aware that they've been all different angles and at all different levels. I don't see any diplomats in the room. Do you? Do you see any diplomatic community people in the room? Do you see? I haven't seen any yet. Okay. Well,
Okay, sorry, we're going to start. So I'm Mandy McKeown. I'm Campaigns Coordinator for International Tibet Network. I'm also here representing Tibet Advocacy Coalition, which is a group of Tibet groups, international Tibet groups, who work specifically to build strategies and support Tibet groups and other NGOs to raise the Tibet issue within the United Nations Forum, and we do quite a lot of work in Geneva. I'm delighted to moderate this panel, which is about the challenges to human rights institutions and ensuring that China is held accountable. We're going to do a very quick self-introduction of the panel before we go into presentations. So, John.
Do you want to think what I was thinking about?
Yes.
Okay, fine.
Introduce
All
yourself.
right. Yes.
Introduce yourself, and then a small précis of what you're going to talk about.
Okay, so I will introduce myself and then talk about what I'm going to talk about. So, hi everyone, and I really appreciate the chance to be here. I think it's a very important time as we prepare for China's UPR scrutiny on Tuesday. I'm John Fisher. I'm the Geneva Director of Human Rights Watch, so responsible for our engagement with international human rights mechanisms. And in that role, we've had a chance to witness firsthand some of China's attempts to prevent civil society from engaging with international institutions to express concerns about the human rights situation. Mainly I'll be speaking to the issues raised in a report that Human Rights Watch produced last year, The Costs of International Advocacy, which documents China's systematic blockage of engagement with mechanisms like the Human Rights Council, the UPR, the treaty bodies, denial of access to special procedures, reprisals against human rights defenders. So obviously I know that these concerns are broadly shared and look forward to talking more about that. Thanks.
Sharon?
Okay. Doesn't want to let me talk.
Right side, right side. Right.
Oh, you have to press the right button. Thank you so much. I'm Sharon Hom. I'm the Executive Director of Human Rights in China, an organization that was formed right before the June 4th, 1989 crackdown. So for the last 30 years, we've been working on raising and supporting individual defenders, groups, and working on policy, reform, advocacy, mostly at the UN and also within bilateral EU, China, US, China, etc. I want to first thank the fantastic and inspiring and wonderful speakers all morning and this afternoon. And I particularly want to thank you, for your insights, your analysis, your passion, and for sharing your pain. A number of you have already spoken about what a critical time we are in. This is not only a critical time, we are living in very dangerous times, and I think globally, not just in China, but around the world, seeing this rise of xenophobia, racism, fascism. Some say neo-fascism. I don't think it's anything neo about it. I think it's fascism and authoritarianism. And just before I left for Geneva, I was in New York. As a Hong Kong-born Chinese, I have watched with great alarm the efforts of Beijing to gut our way of life and the values of Hong Kong, and my organization has attempted to make a small contribution to support the struggles of Hong Kong people. But my other personal is that I'm a US national, and right before I left, I filed my absentee ballot to vote in the midterm election because I'm here, and I thought this is something we're really hoping, because we now have two of the most powerful countries in the world led by two very dangerous leaders. And they both pose a threat to their people, to the environment, and to the world. And so I would just caution against thinking one of them is going to control the other. I think they're both terribly dangerous, and we need to be very clear-eyed about that. What I'd like to do in my remarks later is I'd like to pick up and reflect on many of the themes that I heard all day and this afternoon and build on it. And in particular, I'm really interested in building on the specific concrete suggestions that many of you made. And I'd like to expand it a bit and build on that, because I hear very strongly the appeal to not just talk, and that we need to act, we need to do something. So that's what I will talk about.
All right, are we passing the mic? All right, hello everyone. I couldn't agree more. Oh, can you hear?
It won't go anymore.
Okay.
I'll move up.
Hi everyone, my name is Maren Pang and I work at Freedom House, and it's a real honor to be here. I couldn't agree more with the comments made by my panelists, co-panelists already, and all the sentiments shared earlier today. So what do I do and what do I want to talk about today? I I work on Asia programs at Freedom House. Of course, we're an organization that's an independent watchdog, kind of dedicated to expansion of freedom and democracy around the world. That includes China. We do support this through a combination of research, advocacy, and programming. And in our programming, we give direct support to frontline activists. So our programs tend to track trends in civil society at the grassroots level. And we support capacity building, and we sort of help to translate local stories into international global arguments for rights. And so that's what I'm going to talk about today. We're here today to discuss the trends and developments, and they're not just trends, right? They're stories. These are things happening to people, and so I appreciate the testimony. But what I'd like to talk about is a little bit beyond the testimony that happens related to the third pillar, the human rights pillar. We've been talking a lot about the erosion of the third pillar and its 70 plus years of institutionalization in defending human rights. But in the first and second pillars, where you're seeing things going on related to peace and security and development, we see China being very active. And I think that this is to the detriment of the third pillar. So today I'd like to highlight in my presentation some areas where China is engaging in the first and second pillars. I'd like to connect rights issues to those pillars with some discrete examples of where we've kind of been doing some experimentation as an organization with our partners. And I'd like to share some ideas about how to more effectively engage, because to Sharon's point and the point of so many others, we have to, as civil society, respond. And we have to respond effectively, and we respond in a quite different and unique way than member states here at the UN. And so I think that it is incumbent upon us all to contemplate new ways, to rethink the old ways, and to proceed forward. There's a lot of hope and there's a lot of opportunity, so I look forward to discussing it today.
Hi, I'm pretty sure 95% of you in the room are thinking, no idea who she is. So, my name is Kanchal Chakla. I'm the Special Appointee for Human Rights at the Tibet Bureau here. I was born and raised in exile in India. Later I moved to Canada, got a specialized honors degree in political science, and then I went on to get my law degree. Then I decided that it was time to serve my people, and the Central Tibetan Administration, which is the legitimate representation of the Tibetan people. My presentation will essentially look at Tibet and how it provides an opportunity to protect the integrity of the UN human rights system as a whole.
Thank you. So hopefully that's given you an idea of what we're going to be talking about. So as Sharon was saying, this morning we heard an awful lot about the situation and about how terrible it is and how we really need to be taking action. So our esteemed panel have been kind of considering all of the different ways that we can find solutions to really move forward with that. So if nothing else to be said, here's John.
Thank you very much. And as I mentioned at the outset, I think this is an incredibly timely opportunity for us to be reflecting both on the human rights situation in China and how international mechanisms can fulfill their responsibility to hold the government to account for the systematic human rights violations. I also very much appreciate the work put on in by the organisers of this panel and for the whole forum for making this possible, because I think these opportunities for reflection prior to key moments like China's upcoming Universal Periodic Review are rare, and I know how much work is involved. Let me also say at the outset how sorry we were at Human Rights Watch to learn of the death this week of Lodi Gyari, and we wish strength and courage to all those who will continue his legacy and good work. The UPR, I think, of China is particularly important precisely because China has been so successful at blocking scrutiny of its human rights record through so many of the other international mechanisms and fora. I work a lot with the UN Human Rights Council, and of course in that forum China has fiercely resisted any attempt to bring scrutiny to its human rights record through the usual range of tools available to the Human Rights Council, which include joint statements, resolutions, access and reporting via UN special procedures, and various other mechanisms. The extent of this attempt by China to crack down on opportunities for dissenting voices and freedom of expression was brought home to me personally, I think, in a real way when President Xi Jinping addressed the states in the General Assembly room at the beginning of last year. And there are many heads of state who have addressed gatherings at the Palais des Nations here in Geneva. But what was striking was the extent to which there was more or less a security blockout which prevented civil society organizations like our own from having access to the building, prevented media other than those handpicked by the Chinese government from attending the speech by President Xi. Of course, we recognize that there are many meetings that take place in the Palais des Nations. We're not entitled to have access to all of them. There are many private meetings, although it's hard to describe a meeting in the General Assembly room, which is webcast, as private. But nonetheless, we've always been able to have access to the corridors, to be able to engage with journalists outside the room, to be able to present alternative perspectives and fill in missing parts of the narrative, including the human rights crackdown within the country. But when President Xi addressed states at the General Assembly room, it was the first time in 10 years that I've been in Geneva that I've been turned away at the doors of the United Nations. So that was, I think, a very striking example of the kinds of attempts to control the space and to control the narrative. What was equally striking as well was, I think it was one of the first public statements and appearances by the Secretary General Guterres, who had just been appointed at that time. And of the three people introducing President Xi, not one of them mentioned human rights at all. So development was mentioned, economic and social issues were referenced, but human rights, and particularly the crackdown on civil society and others within the country was completely omitted from that narrative. Human Rights Watch, as I mentioned, produced a report last year which documented China's systematic engagement with UN mechanisms with a view to excluding dissenting voices. I have some extra copies here which I'll leave at the door at the conclusion of the talk today. And also, of course, it's available on our website. But essentially this report documents pretty much every UN mechanism that is available to civil society organizations like ourselves, like the work of many of you, and the ways in which attempts to express views that are critical of the Chinese government have been suppressed or excluded. That includes things as basic as the NGO committee in New York, which grants ECOSOC accreditation to NGOs, enabling any of us to have access to UN spaces and be able to express our points of view. And what we have seen is that China has engaged systematically with the NGO committee with the purpose of denying accreditation to NGOs which are critical of its own human rights record. NGOs like our own, which have a broader human rights mandate, also receive critical questioning about what is our position on human rights situations in China, what is our position on Tibet, requests to amend our website to better conform with China's interpretation of international human rights standards or issues in relation to its own country. We document in the report some of the letters that have been sent to NGOs by the NGO committee, in which they essentially seek to require NGOs to conform with some of their own terminology, some of their own language, some of their own political positions. At the same time, of course, we see a number of NGOs, which we call GONGOs, government-organized NGOs, which are routinely granted accreditation and engage in UN spaces in order to praise governments with questionable human rights records, including China itself. I think it's well known as well that as UN special procedures have sought to have access to China, the government's response has been extremely selective. So special procedures, the UN experts who are tasked to investigate and report on human rights abuses, have been accepted if they examine very specific issues. So, for example, the Special Rapporteur on Extreme Poverty, Philip Alston, was allowed access to the country, but only to look at poverty issues. What he reported to the Human Rights Council was that even then his access was tightly controlled. The government sought to constrain who he could speak to, sought to have people present at many of the interviews, even when those were intended to be confidential, and that those who he met with who might express critical positions of the government, a number of them, it came to his attention, had faced threats or coercion in a way that is obviously inconsistent with the independence and the freedom that he needs to do his job, and for NGOs to meet with him without fear of reprisals. Every year, the Secretary General is tasked to present to the Human Rights Council a report on cases of reprisals against those activists seeking to engage with the UN system. And every year, for a number of years, China features prominently in the list of states responsible for reprisals against human rights defenders and those seeking to engage with the UN system. We know too that when there have been NGO representatives who have been duly accredited to UN meetings, such as Dolken Aiza, the Uyghur activist, China has sought information on who is attending the meeting and sought to have their accreditation revoked, in some cases successfully, and in some cases the accreditation has only come through so late that, that the individuals have been unable to effectively participate in the meetings, that they have travelled long distances sometimes in which to engage. In addition, we are, I think, seeing China play an increasingly aggressive role in spaces like the Human Rights Council to seek to control the narrative and distort the international human rights framework. We know that China has always fiercely resisted scrutiny of its own human rights record, and whenever a state raises concerns about China's human rights record within the Human Rights Council in general debates or otherwise, China always takes the floor on a right of reply, never responds to the substance of the concerns, but always simply points the finger back at the other state and says, well, you know, how dare country X accuse us of anything, and then seeks to discredit their own human rights record. Well, of course, we recognize that no state has a perfect human rights record, so there's nothing wrong with holding other states to account as well, but it's no response to the substantive human rights concerns within the country, nor the need for states to engage with the Human Rights Council in good faith in order to address those human rights concerns. In addition, of course, as others have mentioned, we have seen China presenting resolutions that increasingly seek to insert the narrative into the international human rights framework. So, for example, they presented a resolution on development and human rights, which, on its face, we acknowledge the right to development within a human rights context, but the way in which China sought to construct this narrative was to identify development as a prerequisite for human rights, rather than as a part of the human rights framework, but equally important with the state's responsibility to respect civil and political rights and economic, social and cultural rights. So obviously it is a distortion of the international framework if a state's responsibility to protect human rights for all people is seen as conditioned upon that state's level of development. Similarly, we recently saw China present a resolution on what was initially called win-win cooperation. And I think they are very good at presenting resolutions with formulations that on their face sound innocuous, but which in fact fail to address the real purpose and mandate of the international human rights infrastructure. So this resolution was all about the importance of cooperation and dialogue, which is fine as far as it goes, but was completely silent on what to do when states fail to cooperate, what to do when they suppress dialogue, what to do when in fact they retaliate against human rights defenders and activists who are seeking to expose human rights violations in the state concerned. And I think that's, and you know, within that resolution there were also references to common phrases being advanced by the Chinese government, like the community of shared values. Which is fine as long as you're you're not a Tibetan or a Uyghur activist detained in political re-education camps in Xinjiang. Obviously, there's a problem with the concept of community of shared values if those who don't share the values are persecuted or are excluded from societal protection and respect. So that's some of the context and some of, I think, the different ways in which China engaged with a range of different human rights mechanisms in order to deflect and suppress consideration of its human rights record internationally, in the same way as it employs those similar tactics at home in order to suppress dissent at the national level. That brings us, of course, to next week's Universal Periodic Review and what we may expect from that process. For us at Human Rights Watch, and I think for all of us, it's an incredibly important process, precisely because so many of the other avenues towards critical scrutiny of China's human rights record are systematically blocked. We certainly hope that we will see states engage in order to expose and explore the full range of human rights concerns within China. It remains to be seen the extent to which states will have the political will and the political courage to do that. But if they fail to do so, then there is a real risk that they will themselves be promoting a culture of exceptionalism, where powerful and influential states like China can escape the same kind of scrutiny that is expected of all other members of the international community. we were concerned already that amongst the reports that are presented to the Office of the High Commissioner to inform the Universal Periodic Review process, a number were excluded from the summary of submissions that has been published by the Office of the High Commissioner for Human Rights. So while the Office of the High Commissioner accepted a broad range of submissions, they have excluded submissions by NGOs working on issues relating to Tibet, by Uyghur organizations, and it's difficult to understand the rationale for that. We do understand that just today a corrigendum has been published reinstating some of the submissions that have been excluded, but clearly when the submissions were made available to the office in March of this year, to have them only now being made available just 2 days before the UPR is due to start, effectively prevents those NGOs from having their inputs considered by states in informing the recommendations made by states to China during its upcoming UPR. Sorry, that was it. I've got 2 minutes, all right. I can take the hit. So I think that, that even as we approach the UPR, there are concerns at what seem to be attempts to manipulate the process. We don't know whether these NGO reports were excluded through direct censorship and attempts by China to block receipt and consideration of those reports, or by self-censorship with the office, preemptively seeking to exclude materials for whatever reason. But one of the things we found through our report is that whether through direct censorship or self-censorship, the impact on those excluded is the same, which is the silencing of dissenting voices. We've certainly seen other cases of self-censorship. For example, the European Union routinely presents statements during item 4 of the Council's general debate, looking at some of the most serious human rights situations in the world. In the June session of last year, they failed to present an item 4 statement for the first time, because we understand that Greece objected to a paragraph expressing concerns at the human rights crackdown in China. And so it was quite clear to us from our conversations that that was solely influenced by Greece's unwillingness to bring attention to the human rights situation in China because of bilateral issues and concerns, particularly because of their economic relationship with the country. So we feel that the time has been reached where it is important for the international community to stand up to ensure that not just the human rights situation in China is adequately addressed, but that the integrity of the international framework is respected. Thanks.
Thank you, John. I think you raised a huge amount of points there, a number of which we're going to touch on again as we move along, particularly kind of reprisals
He is practicing speed talking.
Kuncha, I'd like to come to you.
Thanks, Randy. I do want to say I'm privileged to share the panel with such distinguished speakers, and more importantly, I'm honored to speak about Tibet at the United Nations. So as I said earlier, my presentation will focus on Tibet as an opportunity to protect the integrity of the UN human rights system. There was a time when the UN openly and rightfully supported the just cause of the Tibetan people. A series of resolutions on Tibet were once passed at the UN General Assembly. 1959, 1961, and 1965. These resolutions called for the protection of the fundamental rights of the Tibetan people, including the right to self-determination. The 1961 resolution, you'll see, specifically noted the role of UN member states in achieving the purpose of the resolution on Tibet. In 1991, the UN Subcommission on Minority Rights passed another resolution, and that was the end of it. So the question is, why did resolutions on Tibet stop at the UN? We can look at the case of Denmark to answer this question. In 1997, Denmark put forward a resolution on Tibet at what was then the UN Human Rights Commission. And the following year, Danish exports to China fell by 13%. Denmark paid a huge price. China completely isolated Denmark and exposed it to members of the EU, which were in the middle of trying to build economic ties with China. Major EU countries made it clear that they would not support another resolution against China. In that same year, the International Commission of Jurists made 2 concrete recommendations to the UN. First, it called on the UN to defend the fundamental principles of international law which had been trampled upon in Tibet. 2, it said that we should hold a referendum in Tibet under the supervision of the UN to consider the views of the Tibetan people inside Tibet and listen to what they actually want. At this time, Tibetans truly believed that the UN would actually do something. They put a lot of hope and trust in the UN system. However, when there was no action from the UN, we saw the first Tibetan, 60-year-old Thupten Nguruk, to burn himself alive in India, calling for UN intervention in Tibet. As we all know, since 2009, there's been 152 self-immolations inside Tibet. One can say that the UN is partly responsible for the self-immolations because of its inaction. So my question is, why do Tibetans have to burn themselves in order to get the UN's attention? China is bound by the highest standards of international agreements it has agreed to. As a signatory to the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, China is bound to the principles of the Declaration, including Article 19, freedom of opinion and expression. But here is a classic protest image during the 2008 Olympics uprising in Tibet. A monk from Labrang Monastery in Tibet holds a sign in front of a group of foreign media on an official tour which says, which means we don't have freedom of speech. This is a flagrant violation of the Declaration, among many others. China is also bound by various international treaties it has ratified and or acceded to. These are the standards that the UN should be using to call on China. People shouldn't have to burn themselves. Interestingly enough, China itself uses the UN Charter to justify its sovereignty and to criticize other countries for interfering into their internal matters. We've seen this in their white papers and in their UN position papers. They also cited the UN Charter when it vetoed a UN Security Council resolution on Syria. But when it comes to other parts of the UN Charter dealing with self-determination rights and non-discrimination, China conveniently ignores those parts. I'm sure when we were kids, our parents told us, you can't have your cake and eat it too. You can't use certain parts of a legislation and ignore certain parts of the same legislation. Then China goes on to undermine the UPR process. During the 2009 and 2013 UPR sessions, we saw that basically all of the recommendations that China rejected were dealing with compliance with the highest standards of international human rights. Any legitimate comments on Tibet were rejected on the basis that the country was trying to politicize the issue. And the recommendations that China did accept can basically be summarized as a general statement of intent that neither acknowledged nor addressed the gross human rights violations. That brings us to China's ultimate goal at the UN. With their first goal, Professor Pittman Potter at the University of British Columbia says, China is trying to gain legitimacy by participating in international institutions. 2, their goal is not to adhere to international norms and agreements, but to actually challenge and define human rights as we know it. As John mentioned earlier, at the Human Rights Council, we've seen China take an increasingly assertive role in promoting its own version of human rights. China's first ever resolution was passed in June 2017, which essentially places development over human rights. This resolution dilutes the UN human rights system's bedrock principle of universality, indivisibility, and interdependence. Further, it's clear in international law that the lack of development can't be used as a justification to infringe on human rights. This past March, the Human Rights Council adopted China's other resolution entitled Promoting Mutually Beneficial Cooperation in the Field of Human Rights. The resolution focuses on dialogue and cooperation between states and lacks any reference to individuals as rights holders, the role of civil society groups, or the enforcement of human rights. So essentially, China's challenging the integrity and credibility of the UN system. And that's why Tibet presents an opportunity to protect the integrity of the UN human rights system. The Tibetan Freedom Movement stands for democracy, peace, and fundamental human rights, everything the UN stands for. We should all remember why the UN was formed in the first place. After the Holocaust, the UN was formed on the principle that no longer will the international community turn a blind eye to another atrocity. So why is the UN turning a blind eye to Tibet and the Tibetan people? Here's one of my favorite quotes by Martin Niemöller. It goes, "First they came for the socialists, and I did not speak out because I was not a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, and I did not speak out because I was not a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, and I did not speak out because I was not a Jew. Then they came for me, and there was no one left to speak out." Silence is complicit. Now, in order for the UN to do what it was intended to do, I think we need some major institutional changes at the UN. I do want to say, throughout the day, the criticisms against China have been really strong, but when it comes to the recommendations, I don't think the recommendations really live up to the criticisms, so I'll be more radical and realistic in my recommendations. First, we need to change the permanent 5 members of the Security Council and remove the single nation veto power. The 5 permanent members no longer represent today's most powerful nations. They need to be replaced with other big nations. Security Council is often deadlocked over world issues because of the single nation veto power. And let's face it, as long as China is a permanent member with veto power, Tibet will have no place at the UN. Nor Uyghurs, Mongols, Hong Kong. And human rights, as we know, will no longer exist. 2, we need to end closed bilateral human rights dialogue. As Ziyong mentioned in his speech, many of the diplomats have admitted that these expectations are useless. Instead, foreign offices should issue statements on human rights situation in Tibet and in China. Use the multilateral forum at the UN so countries can issue joint or coordinated statements on human rights violations in China. Third, the votes at the Human Rights Council should be secret ballots so that China cannot punish individual countries. Punish the individual countries for doing the right thing. A true multilateral approach will then be able to take place. Number 4, member states who deny entry to UN officials and experts should be met with consequences. The fact that the UN High Commissioner is denied entry to Tibet with impunity is, I think, outrageous. And I think this should have serious consequences. And we can start by denying voting rights on resolutions. And my final recommendation is that special rapporteurs should be independent and funded properly so they can carry out their research and make concrete recommendations. Thank you.
Thank you. It was perfect time, just as my buzzer was about to go. And that leads nicely on to Marion.
Very nicely, yes.
Is your presentation?
I'll pop it up there in a moment. Yeah, it's a surprise.
Oh, it's a surprise?
It's a surprise.
Okay. It's a surprise. Oh, okay.
I know it's late in the day. We need some surprises to keep us awake. So thank you so much for your comments. I think that the comments just made highlight how really the fundamental principles are what we need to continue to guide us. I think oftentimes we forget that it is quite simple, the reasons for the founding of the UN, and I appreciate the remarks of my co-panelist. I might complicate things slightly. What I'm going to talk about is, again, the sort of the activities that we've seen for China's engagement in the first and second pillars, and kind of drawing some tentative conclusions or perhaps insights into what that means for the third pillar, and then really jumping straight to some solutions that we've been experimenting with. So, of course, to reiterate, I think since Xi Jinping took office, we've definitely seen a shift in China's approach to multilateral institutions writ large, not only limited to the UN, but we've seen them move from a posture of observe and attain some achievements, I believe that's a direct Deng Xiaoping quote, to one of global leadership and really an agenda-setting position where they are trying to share their language, as John had been remarking upon earlier. And so, you know, in accordance with this shift in posture, I believe that, again, speaking as somebody from civil society, we also need to shift our posture, and we also need to consider new ways to embark upon this, this attempt to save the UN and to keep these fundamentals in place when it comes to protecting human rights in the third pillar. So we can consider by doing this, you know, sort of to kick us off here, I would share the inspirational quote that I found when I was reading through some of the recent remarks made on the issue of human rights mainstreaming. I think that's effectively what I'm talking about here. The former UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, Mary Robinson, noted at this February's high-level event on human rights mainstreaming that a more comprehensive engagement was needed between the Universal Periodic Review and the Sustainable Development Goals. I think that's a very concrete place to start. As we know, the SDGs have been rebranded since the Millennial Development and now have been, I think, more effectively mainstreamed throughout the UN system than human rights has. They seem to have a great branding campaign, and we have a lot of initiatives in terms of money, funding, resources, support, human resources, and manpower going into those initiatives. So I'd like to just highlight a few examples of how we are trying to link human rights to those issues, or those areas, and particular agencies in those areas. So I will discuss things both in terms of theory and in terms of practice. So these are some hypothetical scenarios as well as perhaps some real ones. We would like to raise first the example of, in the security pillar, right? So we would like to raise the example of an agency called the UN Office of Drugs and Crime. You may not be familiar with this, and you may also think, what does drugs and crime have to do with human rights, right? In name, it sounds completely unrelated. Well, the mandate of the UNODC is to make the world safer from crime, drugs, and terrorism. And it is an example of an area where China has been engaging to build international credibility in terms of security infrastructure. So we see that an MOU was announced between the PRC Ministry of Justice, which we all know has some serious issues in terms of human rights, rule of law, and police abuse. In May of this year, they announced that they would collaborate to strengthen crime prevention and criminal justice. Of course, the UPR report covers rule of law issues. We know that some of those have been raised in detail, and again, the massive role that the police play in committing human rights abuses. And this is a UN agency that provides technical assistance in order to improve the quality of such entities within the country. Furthermore, 90% of the UNODC budget is funded by member states. So of course we see here that a clear conflict of interest, or at minimum sort of moral challenge, is presented when the very institution charged with reforming the institutions in country that are responsible for committing the human rights abuses is paid for by that member state. So what does civil society do about this? And why does this matter to the UPR? And why does this help us mainstream? Well, I think that a concrete way that we can approach this is to raise inquiries about the application of UNODC's own standards to safeguard human rights. We see so often that these UN agencies have papers that they've drafted so that they can demonstrate their attempts to mainstream these principles and safeguard human rights. The UNODC in particular has one called Promotion and Protection of Human Rights. It's a position paper. It was written in 2012. It's a brilliant paper. It has wonderful suggestions. But also I'd note that on the cover of the paper at the very bottom, and I think about size 12 font, it says this is not an official UN document. And so I think that that is an invitation to civil society to take up the recommendations in such a document and raise them with the UNODC as well as other agencies that have similar documents and say, hey, we know that you have an MOU, we know that this is a confidential agreement with a member state, but by the way, we are just curious to hear, how are you protecting? What due diligence steps have you taken to prevent this? And send them the UPR report, send them the information that you have on the cases from your communities, and tell them exactly what it is that they are getting themselves into. To be fair, a lot of these agencies are working with the member states, and perhaps they're not China specialists, right? Perhaps that this is an opportunity to raise awareness, to educate, and to engage in a very fundamental kind of bootstrap advocacy kind of way. So that's one example. I would say another example is UN Women. UN Women has an office in China. UN Women has as its mandate that they place advancement of women's human rights at the center of our work. Human rights is in that mandate. It's in the title. So we know that that's the commitment. But let's take a look under the hood. So for UN Women, they've set up the China and Gender Facility to give grants that fund innovative proposals that support research on contemporary gender issues, as well as advocacy and dialogue, leading to gender-responsive development plans, policies, and programs in China. So we know that they are authorized to give support to supposedly grassroots organizations to be working to advance these causes. We know, of course, that gender is another component of SDGs. It's mainstreamed throughout. So clearly it's important to the UN, and there are a lot of initiatives proceeding in that direction. But then we see examples of where independent activists have been punished for raising issues related to gender. We see the voices of people such as Li Tingting, Wei Tingting. Is that mine?
I don't know.
Oh, doesn't sound like my ringtone.
It's Star Trek, so it must be mine.
We see organizations like Wei Jiming closed down, and we see other advocacy groups such as Feminist Voices also shut down. So these are all examples of groups that are independent, that for whatever reason have crossed some sort of red line, would not qualify for the assistance given by the CGF, but yet fall perfectly otherwise within this mandate of women's human rights, advocacy, and dialogue as stated on the website of the agency. So I think that is another opportunity, again, a concrete opportunity for organizations that are focused on China, but not only China, also on women's issues and gender, to raise questions about this. If this is the commitment, then what is being done to resolve the challenges that are being faced by these organizations and individuals who are advocating accordingly, but perhaps a little bit too much independently within China. So I have one final example, and it's a big one. It's the UNDP. So I think if you look at the UNDP, we know that this is the hallmark for development, as the name suggests, and we know their mandate. We also know the extent to which perhaps they have been engaging with China in One Belt Road policies and other development initiatives. But I want to actually talk about something very specific that they're doing, an example where they released a report on legal gender recognition in China, a legal and policy review, status of the transgender persons in China. This is an incredibly progressive thing to see on the website, and I was actually very encouraged to see it. I was very encouraged because I think to have this sort of thing on the record and to have the financial support to do the review is helpful to civil society groups on the ground who may not otherwise be able to do that type of analysis. And yet, again, I would like to highlight the disparity in terms of the rights issues. We've seen that LGBT activists are harassed, monitored, they are surveilled on a daily basis, 24 hours a day, around the clock. Their cell phones are infiltrated, their chat messages are read, and they are detained for raising issues publicly. In fact, the government of China shut down 2 LGBT conferences in 2017, detained 9 of the activists that organized those conferences, and did eventually release them without charges, but obviously this is not a cooperative strategy for civil society to advance those causes. So I would also like to highlight this example because it's a concrete way where that raises a need, I think, within the activist community, as I've heard it when I'm speaking with them in China, is that it's incredibly difficult to even understand what's going on at the UN because the information is blocked because of the Great Firewall, because the materials are not translated into Chinese. And this is a constant complaint that we get from our partners who say that they simply don't know what's going on. And in this particular instance, I actually think it's a good example of how we, as people outside of China, can work to provide feedback to the activists in China by sharing with them, hey, you know, your own government, they did this really great legal analysis on the rights of transgender people. What do you think how do you think that analysis went? And do you feel that it's comprehensive? If they don't, then I think that that's a great opportunity for us to work together to raise the ways in which it could be improved, the analysis, to the actual benefit of activists on the ground. So these are 3 concrete examples of how different agencies across the pillars do have dramatic impact and implication for rights. It's a way for us to perhaps cover some of the territory as China's footprint expands across the UN to raise these issues consistently and in a way that is informed by independent activists. I'm just going to end my little chat here with an example because I think, let me see. All right, I'm just going to warn you, this is a bit complicated, so don't get overwhelmed. But perhaps before I click on the button. So, to keep you in suspense. So, we have mainstreaming, right? We have some examples. But I would like to raise a little bit of a metaphor before I hit you with this data visualization. I'd like to raise the metaphor of the elephant. This is a common strategy metaphor that people talk about, and so we've all kind of behind closed doors been saying that we really want to get to the meat of the strategy on this, and so the elephant, when seen as a whole, is an elephant. But if you have individuals that are blindfolded, and you place them around different parts of the elephant, and you ask them to describe the elephant, they're likely going to describe it in vastly different ways. Right? Somebody who's behind the elephant might feel like the leg of the elephant and say, oh, it's kind of rough and short and gross. I don't know what they would say. Somebody that's in front of the elephant, you know, can maybe see that they have a long trunk. Oh, this is a very tall animal, right? But there's not a comprehensive, holistic picture of the whole. And so I'm basically going to make an appeal for how we as civil society, and perhaps in coordination with our like-minded member states, can begin to put together a bigger picture of the whole and really understand the elephant so that we can develop better strategies for engaging. Thank you for abiding that metaphor. And so here is the dramatic conclusion.
Pretty whole.
This is the elephant, by the way.
It comes clear now.
Put a Okay, my French is bad. All right, so in order to see the elephant, we really need to visualize it. So in terms of my solutions and recommendations, I mean, I have a million of them, but what I'm going to start with is visualize the field. I think we need to have a better understanding of where China is engaging. We need to know who they're engaging with. We need to know how. We need to know on what terms. We need to kind of start mapping out friendlies, foes, allies, advocates. We need to do this in a systematic way, and we really need to understand the dynamics so that we can assess room for progress. This is an example that we have developed at Freedom House in our work with some partners, trying to better understand the situation for the Uyghurs. So this is a very case study specific example. Where we have, here in the green, we have NGOs. I blocked out some of their names because it's a confidential Here on the bottom, we have the Uyghur diaspora groups. We have media service, we have RFA here. And then as you move up into this corner, we have UN agencies, we have parliamentary bodies, and then we have the Chinese government itself. So I think that this is an example of a technique that it looks complicated, but the result is that you have a bigger picture understanding of a particular issue, the actors and how they interact. And I think that it's a great way to start thinking more strategically about how to coordinate with your partners, how to build coalitions, how to articulate arguments and frame and connect the rights to these specific targets where China is engaging just as robustly. And I think it's incumbent upon us to be a little bit smarter in the ways that we engage. And so that's going to be my big takeaway for everyone here. Of course, this is fairly overwhelming, I acknowledge. So I would say that in addition to this, this is from my own experience, if you are engaging non-human rights bodies at the UN, please educate them on the real security concerns of human rights defenders and the global partners. Many bodies are not aware of the history of reprisal against human rights defenders since they are not regularly in touch with them. So it makes it difficult to meet or even bring people to give informal testimony. And I would also remind you that if you do choose to embark on this path of alternative engagement outside of the all-important human rights bodies, that you must remind them, please, that they do have the obligation to take action on any cases of reprisals that they hear of. And that includes making reports to the Secretary General's annual report. So I think I'll leave it at that and look forward to discussion further. But I do want to close on the note that this is not to say that the traditional human rights bodies in the third pillar are not worth our time. Absolutely, we must be engaging. But I just want to offer an alternative picture to how we can be matching the footprint of China more comprehensively. Thank you.
Thank you, Marion. I must say, she's taken it down. I was hugely excited when Marion showed me this last night. I'm not sure how many people were here at the special meeting convened by CTA, I think it was in 2012, where there was a group which spoke about joining the dots and us looking at how we can really map out kind of different agencies and different kind of forms of support and solidarity. And when I saw this, I actually spoke to Lana and Alison about it yesterday, and then when I saw this last night, suddenly it all came together. And Tibet Network will definitely be talking to them about how we can grow this sort of project. And that said, Sharon?
Thank you. That was a lot. That was overwhelming. So, I want to start with just the proposition that what we really need to do is not only shift, I think all of us, all actors in the human rights ecosystem, states, media, civil society, think tanks, academics, I think what we really need now in this moment is a complete mental strategic reset. Right? It's like pull it out and start. And I'm not going to show you how to do that, but I think what I'd like to do is, as I said, I want to walk through the high-level reflections on this morning and then build. So this panel is focusing on strategies to address China's challenges to specifically the UN system. But I think it's important to remember that, number one, China's UN strategies are part of a broader global strategy, as we all talked about today. Secondly, China is strategic. They have goals, targets, and approaches, and their strategy is linking domestic and international. They are very conscious, and what Marvin was suggesting about going outside of different rooms and venues, China's already doing that, and they're doing it in a coherent, linked way. Thirdly, they are not only playing the long game, they're playing short, medium, and the past. So they're like taking the past and the present and the future, and they're going out not 2047, they're going out to 2050 and beyond. Thirdly, the strategies, not only does China have enormous resources and capacity, they are controlling the resources and capacity of UN bodies, the Office of the High Commissioner. They actually have a big hand holding that big purse. Today, we've been all day mentioning, and only briefly, some of them. And there are three clumps, I think, that we're all affected when I say we. There are the governments, there's civil society, and there are foundations. We haven't talked about foundations and donors, and the multinationals, like we did hear Google briefly mentioned, and all of the string of apologies from companies. With respect to civil society, and I want to flag that in terms of the academics, the NGOs, and every actor on this chart has been subjected to the whole range of harassment, intimidation, denial of access, giving of benefits, taking away benefits. So I think every one of this, including foundations, including obviously civil society retaliation, including governments, everyone has been subject to the same kinds of reprisals. In other words, we're all in the same boat. So governments who think, well, they're going to get the defenders and I'll do what we can, but it won't come to me, it already has to a number of governments. So that also means not only is every actor targeted, it means every actor has an opportunity and every actor must make a difference. Because if we, you don't, everyone is going to sink. The whole boat is going to sink. I'm not going to go through all this except to take a look at that the international broader strategy that I said that the UN strategy is part of is particularly disturbing now in light of the US government's withdrawal from the global leadership, such as, and withdrawal from multilaterals and its rejection of multilateralism. So China's global strategy now is even more effective because of the withdrawal of a major player. And we talked a lot about soft power, but I thought just to put a picture of everything that everyone was talking about today in one picture. I want to, okay. Now, so this is, now I did not do this. And in fact, this is David Bandersky, one of my favorite commentators, did a commentary on this. Who do you think mapped Xi Jinping thought? Not David, not the China Media Project. It was the Chinese official media. Why was that? Because they wanted to explain Xi Jinping thought to everybody else in China. You thought it was self-evident? No. And so each of these branches explains Xi Jinping thought and how it should apply. Like number 7 happens to be to the media. And I commend you to David's whole article, which is hilarious if it weren't so terrible. So, so here is, Xi Jinping, core leader, and his thought now is the framework. It is the ideological framework for law, for policy, and it is this thought is incorporated in the Chinese constitution, and the loyalty, but before you can be loyal, you have to understand it. So like they're trying to have, study groups and, but once you sort of understand it, you have to be loyal. Who? Judges, lawyers, prosecutors, teachers, journalists, everyone must be loyal to Xi Jinping thought. So this is why I'm saying we are well beyond, needing a shift. Because up until this moment, particularly at the UN, there was an intentional slippage of translation. So I often listen to the Chinese different track and hear how they're translating terms. There was an intentional mistranslation, often. So when you hear the Chinese say, 依法治国, like to govern the country by law, the Chinese interpreters would say, rule of law. And then everybody all the members say, great, they're talking rule of law, we all love rule of law. But they're not saying that at all. So when I made that correction once in one of my interventions, I said, frankly, 依法治国 is not rule of law, it's to rule the country by law. And the Chinese representative got up and corrected me and said, Ms. Han may be Chinese, but she may not have good Chinese, because it doesn't mean rule by law, it means to govern by law. So I said, okay, governed by law. It's a regime and it's rule. This is another effort that is decoding Chinese concepts, and I'm going to say a little bit why I think it's so important. But this is decoding all these new Chinese concepts that you all have been throwing out, and now there are efforts to decode what's the missing step. There's a lot of very good work being done as what are they talking about? What are they really talking about? What is Xi Jinping really talking about? I think our task is how to counter it. What are we going to do about it? This article is also being done by one of, I think, the really good think tanks doing work on China, Merix, based in Berlin. Okay, this one is very interesting, and this is, there was some reference to emperor president. Well, this is not only emperor president, this is indeed a linkage because Xi Jinping has claimed the lineage back to almost Qin Shi Huangdi, the first emperor of China. And Didi Tatlow, a journalist who's in residence also at Merix, did this mapping. And what did she map? She showed that under imperial China, Tianxia, all under heaven, has now become community of a shared destiny for mankind. Tianchao, the heavenly court of the emperor, has now become the Communist Party of China. Jimmy, the bribing and feeding of the vassal states, has now become United Front Department party work, also One Belt, One Road. The old vassal states have now created client states, or China's like-minded, but like-minded might be weird to people who don't have a mind, but, you know, right, but it's like-minded, right? So all of this is, I want to give the analogy, do people know the children's story, the emperor with the emperor's clothes, the emperor's new clothes? Yeah, you know that, right? So Xi Jinping thought, for new era of Chinese socialism, this is new thought. All this time, the emperor has been naked. From 1949 to now, it has never been a mistake to us. None of us have been deluded to think that the Chinese Communist Party was going to be rule of law, it was going to respect rights. None of us ever thought that. So we always knew the emperor was naked. But because the emperor was powerful and had to tell everybody else, you can't say the emperor's naked, everybody played along with this fake reality and engaged with China thinking they would get benefits from engaging with the naked emperor. Here's the dilemma that requires a mental reset. Xi Jinping specifically has come out and said, I'm naked. And he has said, I'm naked, we don't believe in rule of law, we don't believe in rights-based development, we don't believe in universalism. He basically says, I'm naked, deal with it. And some members of the international community, I guess I won't name names because you might be in the room, you know, so I'm going to keep us as a we, but some members of the community have reacted to this come clean naked thing, and instead of saying, what do we do? Because there's no way China under Xi Jinping will ever converge with our notion of a state that protects rights. It will never happen. Instead of figuring out what to do, this is what's happening. You know deer? You know deer? You know? Okay. Deer frozen in the headlights of a car coming, they're freezing. And you know that doesn't end well for the deer. You got to move. You have to act. Silence, you're dead. Abstaining, you're dead. You have to act. You cannot be frozen deer in a headlight. So, I mean, I'm sorry I'm mixing all these metaphors, but you know, you get the point. You get the point, right? Yeah. So, like, it needs a mental reset, and we need to act. Because if we freeze, we're all under the bus. Sorry, I'm not a metaphor. Come on, I'm jet lagged. At the end of the day, you're all being very patient. Okay, so what I'd like to do in the next part is I want to take apart some of the concepts. Why? Because we're talking about China's narrative, but this is what it is. China's story is weaponized. China's story is the weapon they're using to undermine international rights. And the tools, the weapons itself, are the concepts and the terms. So I know that many times, particularly at the UN, China goes blah, 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 goes on with its story, and everyone says it's just China talking. We can't allow that anymore, because when China talks like that, and nobody says anything, we are legitimating China's story, right? So actually, China says China should tell the Chinese story properly to show an authentic three-dimensional China and improve the country's soft power. Well, who said that? The Cyber Security Administration of China. You know, they're not like the Freedom of Expression organization in China. So this is why we need to really take on the Chinese narrative. And the first thing I want to say is the Chinese story, you see Chinese story, the first thing we should say is it's not the Chinese story. It's not to tell the Chinese story. Let's start inserting bubbles. It's to tell the Communist Party story. That's what it is. So what is Chinese culture? See, Chinese culture? I have to tell you that as a Cantonese Hong Konger, I have been told to my face by certain people that I should have more respect for Chinese culture. You should have more respect for Chinese culture. Okay. like we define Chinese culture. Okay. So Chinese culture is, I want to say there's three kinds, and let's distinguish them. There's history, thousands of years, ancient culture. There's revolutionary culture of 1949, and now there's so-called advanced socialist culture. Here is Confucius. Xi Jinping at the home of Confucius. He's looking down Dongshan Mountain and he's claiming Confucius' mantle. And when the world is undergoing major transformation, he's striding out into the world, the new Confucius, and he's like, you know, carrying the mantle. But lest you think that Xi Jinping is only going to come out and do this, I want to show you this. Can you see this? Okay, this is, now you know Facebook is censored in China. This is Xi Jinping's Facebook page. Okay, so this is Xi Jinping's Facebook page, and this is a mapping of the likes of his page when he went out on a tour. So you see the biggest likes, India, Cambodia, Philippines, you know, Pakistan, they really liked his Facebook page on the other hand. So clearly the rules of censorship and, you know, who can come into China and all that, that is not for Xi Jinping. He gets his own rules, he's above the law, everything else. So this is what he gets. So let me quickly wrap with China's challenges. This is Titan, meaning it's demolition. This is what it is. It's China's trying to demolish, attack, replace, attack, replace. That's what it's doing. It's not shifting, it's not undermining anymore, attack and replace. And this is what I say that we really need to not allow, this dispersive strategy. So I have some quick things. First of all, when we say culture, we should say party culture. When we say Chinese, we should not conflate Chinese people with the party. The party conflates the party and people. Party, people, not the same. Hurting the feelings of the Chinese people, therefore you can't hurt the feelings of the Chinese people. You may be hurting Xi Jinping's feeling, but do we care? No. So I think the invocation of sovereignty, already, Kunta has already referenced the invocation of the charter. No, Xi Jinping is not invoking sovereignty as understood in the charter. It is a complete misuse of the term sovereignty, and it's also, how do you say the word, hypocritical. Because while China says you must respect our sovereignty, it then detains, abducts, and disappears nationals of other states. That's not respecting your sovereignty. And once they've abducted your nationals and you claim under council or treaty that you would like to visit your national, you will be rejected. You will not get access to your national. Thirdly, if you can't talk about China's human rights record because it's interfering in its sovereignty, frankly, China does a very good job issuing human rights report about the terrible human rights abuses in the US. So we really should realize that when they invoke sovereignty, no go. It's hypocritical, it's two standards, and it's not what sovereignty means in the UN Charter. It's not what sovereignty means in terms of international law. And we know what mutual cooperation and mutual respect means. It means agree with me, you know. Okay. So these are the concepts that I think we should, and then the most ludicrous, I'm sure Wu Garcia is laughing here, the Chinese democracy model, and that is to say, look at what the democratic model produced in US, Trump. Therefore, it is time for the Chinese model. No, because the difference is, let's wait till after midterm. I don't think the jury's out on that. And China and American people are fighting back at every level. So, one sentence on UPR? Okay, UPR. There's a lot of talk of UPR next week. Here's the problem with UPR. I don't want to trash and throw the baby out with the bathwater, but here's the problem with UPR. UPR was always a flawed mechanism. It is the foxes guarding the hen house. It's state-focused. China doesn't have to do anything. China can accept or reject and do nothing once it even rejects. China has manipulated the process on point of orders, trying to control who can speak, what can be said, and how you speak. And you remember the famous ambassador from China said, "You can't tell us about our human rights violations because only the wearer of the shoes knows if the shoe fits." So everybody went, what? You know, yeah. I said, yeah, well, I think 1.4 billion people know when the shoe fits and it doesn't fit, you know, but they say it fits. Okay, so as you know, document 9, the infamous document 9 of the party, says universal values is one of the 7 perils faced by the CPC in maintaining one-party rule. Okay, this is UPR 1, UPR 2. Haven't said that I think it's an imperfect mechanism. It's what we got in terms of the comprehensive review. But here's the good news. It's a work in progress, and we've been contesting it. The procedures have been changing. The states have actually more spoke up, raising more issues. It's the role of civil society to ensure that it's not a joke and just like a sham. So we're going up to UPR 3 next week. If you want to see our recommendations, we took on the whole systemic challenges, and you can see our UPR report on our website. We have a UPR page now open. Civil society, my last point, we are the key. Darden said it is the people who lead and at the forefront of repression. It is the people who are going to be the leaders of the arc of social justice. And I really believe that that arc is going to be much stronger and longer than the arc of the ambitions of a single dictator. But here's the problem. The civil society submissions from China on UPR, on the left and on the right, is the last 2. And you can see the gongos in red are quite a lot. And then you see the international, and I think some of the Chinese independent organizations came in under the international. This is important. We need to make it so that you don't get murdered in a PLA hospital if you try to participate. It's very important that civil society can participate in this imperfect process, but it needs civil society. Our report for UPR, and there was a recommendation made to make the information more widely available. Those of you, we've worked with a lot of you for the torture. China submitted its responses to the torture committee only in Chinese. So you know that the torture committee are experts, and the only Chinese member who speaks Chinese is not allowed to participate in China's review. So they submitted the answers in a language nobody could understand. Yeah, so we actually translated all of them and sent it to the experts about 10 days before the review, so they had a little time to read. We also surveyed every single Chinese government ministry who should have had information about UPR, CERD, torture, everything. And you can look at the chart in our report. 0, 0, 0, 0, 0, right? So I agree, they should, be circulating the UN information. We have to monitor it, and we have to tell them to do it. These are the like-minded countries, which are not the like-minded countries Marin was talking to, but they work together, and that's why we have to work together to try to limit civil society, and there are opportunities. And can I end with a story of hope? I just don't want to be so,
Why don't you hold your story of hope until the end?
I think they need hope.
Finish with the story of hope.
Can they have
no,
hope?
we can finish with the story of hope.
Finish with the story of hope? Okay, you have to wait for hope.
We need to open for questions.
Okay, wait for hope. Okay, thanks.
Otherwise we don't have time.
Okay.
So we are running out of time, so I am going to open questions directly to the floor. If anyone has a question they want to press there.
I would like to know.
Can you use your story? Can you use your microphone?
He wants the story.
The story of
yes. That's great. Diet Coke just went up my nose. Okay, again. Can I answer? Okay, so there's I feel that as governments, responsible governments, as leaders, as NGOs, as everyone, I don't think we have the luxury of pessimism. I really don't. And I feel that the Chinese authorities and an authoritarian regime can take away the land, take away your space, take away your freedom, take away your life. You know what they can't take away? Hope. That's the one thing we hand to them. So that's why I feel we should never hand it over. I mean, never just hand it over. So my story of hope is partially for Ed Chen and also for everybody. Is during Occupy Central, when Hong Kong people learned something profound about ourselves, that we didn't care just about money. We didn't care just about being the poster child of capitalism. We cared about our values, and we learned that we could build a community in a public space. So I was down there around the tents and stuff, and I was interviewing on video different people, and it's on our YouTube channel if you want to see it. So I'll tell two interviews. One is this little boy. He was like very little. He was maybe 6. Turned out he was 6. And he's making yellow ribbons. It was like child labor. He had a whole mountain of yellow ribbons. And I was interviewing the mother, and I said, is that your son? And she said, yes. I said, he's like making yellow ribbons all night. I said, can I interview him? And she said, yes. So I went up to this little boy, and I said, hi, Sing Pang Yao. I said, hello, little friend. I said, how old are you? And he goes, look, sorry, I'm 6, and he's busy still making the ribbons, right? I said, do you know what you're doing? And without a beat, this kid goes, I want genuine universal suffrage. He's 6. And his little sister, who was really adorable, was making ribbons. She says, what's 6? Yeah. She goes, I know how to write. I go, what can you write, honey? And she goes, I want genuine universal suffrage. And they said it just like that. So I said to the mother, but they're children. Are you like propaganda? I mean, is this like, okay? And she said, we came out to support the students. But this fight is not this generation only. We need to start preparing the generation after this generation, after that generation. She understood how long it's going to take. And while I was going up and down, talking myself dry as usual, this old man came by. He must have been in his 70s or maybe, and he's pulling a wooden box. He's like pulling a box, and in the box are oranges. It's full of oranges. He's a retired old guy. He just came to make sure that those of us, that people had oranges. So he came to me and he said, you have to eat more fruit. I said, well, thank you, but I'm doing an interview. And he said, no, you must, he insisted I take 1 orange, and he gave me another. I said, okay, so I'm holding the 2 oranges, and I'm like, I said, okay. And then I see him just pulling the oranges down the whole line of the tents on both sides, and he's giving out oranges. So that was what I think, is that we have to understand the generational. Those are amazing, but that old man reminded us we have to take care of each other. I mean, we have to take care of each other, and that was my story. Doesn't make you hopeful.
Can I just say that it kind of links back to Narden's point earlier in the day about how, you know, the Tibetans who are still resisting now are Tibetans who have grown up, you know, under Chinese rule. Then, you know, they have never known an independent Tibet, but that resistance is still there, that hope is still there. So, Kunchata, did you have?
Yes, I wanted to make a comment. I think Professor Sharon made a good point differentiating between CCP's culture and Chinese culture. But I also think it's important to differentiate between Chinese culture and Tibetan culture. I noticed a picture of the giant panda in the presentation. I do want to mention that the giant panda is a Tibetan bear. The largest lab of pandas is located in northern Sichuan, and Tibetans surround 75% of the lab. So always remember, panda is a Tibetan bear.
And on that note, are there any more questions from the floor?
Sorry, I don't have a question, but that's something to one of Sharon's slides about President Xi Jinping's Facebook. And that's very surprising because in that Facebook page, he had massive number of likes from Pakistan. I think these are not Chinese, Pakistani. These are Chinese construction workers working on the massive seabed project in Pakistan. So I think that's very big.
It's true that we should be careful about the likes because it's also the Shujun, the water army, as well as the Wumao. So some of those likes may be inflated. Yeah.
more questions? I think given time. I'd just quickly like to ask, on the kind of closing note of hope, if each panel member could give us kind of one hope for the kind of this period, this period of time that we're in, that they would like to see us kind of move forward with.
Sure, well I do think this is a time of enormous challenge, but also a time of opportunity. And we have seen the US being one of the few countries in the Human Rights Council that's willing to challenge China through joint statements and otherwise. They've left the Human Rights Council, of course, and frankly, under the Trump administration, it's not a huge loss. But I think what it has meant is that there are other states who are increasingly willing to step up and fill that vacuum. And we know that there have been dialogue with a number of states who are willing to increasingly question China's ascendancy, its lack of commitment to human rights. And I think Tuesday will be a good test of whether that happens. So we'll certainly be working with all delegations to try and encourage maximum attention to the human rights concerns that have been identified today. And if we can't get that degree of attention, then at least we can hand out oranges.
This is a really tough question. I think especially for technocrats like me who like charts and stuff, and we're always trying to think about the tactical, technical solutions to things, and that's not always possible. But one of the things that I actually think is been giving me hope personally recently is that I've been rereading Samantha Power's book, A Problem from Hell. And the first couple of chapters, if you've not read the book yourself, basically cover the story of Raphael Lemkin as he is trying to get the UN to accept the term genocide as an official legal term. And it is the story of intense perseverance of one man who basically just bothers people until they are willing to listen to him. He knocks on doors, he walks from member state to member state. I think at one point he was like living out of a closet. I mean, it's just that kind of story. But it's that kind of dedication that created a standard by which we are now trying to advocate for the rights of Uyghurs, by the rights of others who are undergoing these horrific things. So I think the fact that he was able to get that done is emblematic of what we can collectively achieve, and I put a lot of faith in that collective, and thank you for your work because it is very inspirational, and let's keep going.
I want to just, thank everybody that the Tibetan community and my, can I use the word comrades, and I want to appropriate that back, Dokin and all our Uyghur activist friends, and also our Chinese Minyun activist friends, I think that this does my heart so good, and I hope it's done all of your hearts so good, because I think we need to hold on to not just the tangible success. There's the spirit, success, the spirit benefits we get from being together and thinking and talking together, and I think that's really important. So I think 加油, and also 三手拿茶. Did I say it right?
She said Senshu Mata.
Thank you for translating.
What gives me hope is after 60 years of repression, the Tibetan people are strong and resilient. And that gives me hope each day. I visited Tibet in 2015. I was in the Kham region, and so I was inside a house. Someone came to get me at the door to go visit my relatives. I didn't really see the person's face because in the Tibetan culture we usually have what do you call it?
Door hanging.
Yeah, on the door. So I didn't really see his face because he was hiding behind it. Then I said, I'll get ready and come out right away. And then I ran out. Just as I ran out, he'd already started walking up the hill. So I just followed him to go meet my relatives. We walked for a bit. And then it was sunny, hot, and the altitude sickness. And then after a bit, he turned around and said, "We're here." Then I looked at him, and he looked exactly the same as my grandfather, except 30 years younger. And I said, "Oh my God, are you related to me?" And And then he smiled and said yes. And at that point, I understood the gravity of the human rights violations that Tibetan people have gone through. And but he was still a very happy person, a very optimistic person. When I meet these kinds of people, it gives me hope each day. Thank you.
I finished that.
Thank you, Mandy, and thank you to all the speakers. Before we conclude, I would like to request Mr. Sonam Nobu Thakur, Secretary of Department of Information and International Relations, to deliver the vote of thanks.
On behalf of the Central Tibet and the Office of Tibet, Geneva would like to thank everybody for making this forum a success, great success. We all know that our department decided to hold this forum on the eve of the UPR on China, and then we also decided that we bring all the people who are under People's Republic of China. So this morning, we heard people speaking on different issues, like on the issue of Tibet. We also have people speaking on East Turkestan and Southern Mongolia, and also we have speakers from mainland China also. So this shows that someone had said in the morning that People's Republic of China is a totalitarian country, and because of that, citizens of China do not enjoy human rights. At the same time, the regions under People's Republic of China, like Tibet, East Turkestan, Southern Mongolia, they suffer more than the Chinese, because the Chinese government follow a new colonialism policy that we do not, there's more kind of oppression there than in the mainland China. Now, we thought that all the representatives had spoken this morning, and I would like to thank, before taking much of a time, I'd like to thank Sikyong Dr. Lobsang Sengye, the President of Central Tibetan Administration, for taking his time to give us the keynote address this morning. I would also like to thank Honorable Lisa Maison, the Member of Parliament of Switzerland. She's also the Member of Parliament Group for Tibet of Switzerland. And I would also thank all the speakers this morning. We have expert speakers and experienced speakers from all the regions under the People's Republic of China. And also I would like to thank the expert panelists in the afternoon who have given recommendations on how to bring China to account. And before I end, I would like to thank the officials of the Tibet, Geneva Office of Tibet, Mr. Ngurup Tochi. He was instrumental in making this forum a successful one. And also would like to thank Mrs. Kandil Somo. She was just here about a month. She was transferred from Dharamsala, but she was instrumental in organizing this conference. And also I would like to thank my colleagues from Dharamsala. We have Mrs. Dudeki. Ms. Dudeki, she joined our office about a month back, and now she's also instrumental in organizing this from our side, from India. So without taking much of time, I would like to thank everybody for making this forum a successful one. Thank you very much.
With this, we have come to the end of today's program. Thank you all again, and have a good evening.